There you go. 4-punch, 5-punch, 6-punch combination. Body shot, bang, 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 bang.
Telling him not to counterpunch.
Boom! Will Rackman get up?
Only iron. You're going through all the instructions. This is for the championship of the world. I expect a tough, clean fight. Protect yourself at all times.
Welcome, fight fans. This is your host, Alden Kodash, welcoming you to the 42nd episode of the Fight City podcast. I am joined again by the editor-in-chief of the Fight City. We have Michael Carbert by way of Montreal, Canada. How are you?
I'm doing all right, Alden. How are you?
I'm getting better. At least in my neck of the woods, COVID cases are starting to go down. Can't say the same for the rest of the country, by and large, but boxing is starting to tick up a little bit. We have some entertaining fights coming up that we want to talk about, but first off, on Tuesday night on ESPN, we had kind of a loaded card in the bubble in MGM Grand, the site of all the fights so far. We had Oscar Valdez making his first appearance at 130, becoming the first man to stop Jason Velez. We also had Edgar Berlanga improving to 14-0, all by first-round knockout. Isaac Dogboe with a good performance. But first we'll talk about Kim Clavel of the Fight City. She was the winner of the ESPN Pat Tillman Award for her service. She put her career on hold to help out as a nurse with the COVID crisis, and she got an impressive shutout victory against Natalie Gonzalez. Really good showing for a good person, Michael.
Yes, all of Quebec and I would hope all of Canada is very proud of Kim Clavel and the recognition she's receiving. By all accounts, she's a standout person as well as a very talented boxer. I will confess I don't follow women's boxing very closely. But my understanding is she is climbing the rankings. She's undefeated. And I think it's fantastic that she got the exposure that she did, being on a top-ranked card, and she deserved it. So winning that SB, the Pat Tillman Service Award, and getting the attention that's come from that, and then a high-profile fight, this is big stuff. This is going to move her career forward in a significant way. And it's exciting. It's exciting for everyone in the boxing scene in Montreal. And we just wait and see what's next.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been some top-notch female action on ESPN. Last week we had Michaela Meyer with an impressive 10-round shutout against Helen Joseph. But Kim Clavel, congratulations. Isaac Dogboe, as I mentioned, it's his first fight with 2007 WBO Trainer of the Year Barry Hunter, who more recently has trained Sean Porter to his close split decision loss against Errol Spence. This is Dogboe's first appearance under him, and he got an impressive 8th-round stoppage of Chris Avalos. Of course, he's coming off of some disappointing losses in the past against Emmanuel Navarrete, a couple of them. But hopefully he gets his career back on the right path. Got a good victory behind him to do so. Edgar Berlanga, as I mentioned earlier, he improved to 14-0, all by first-round knockout. He knocked out Eric Moon with a tremendous overhand right at 1 minute and 2 seconds of the first round. And it's interesting because Damian Lillard, when you score enough first-round knockouts in a row, you could think back to Mike Tyson in the 80s. People start to take notice regardless of who you're fighting, really. I mean, Damian Lillard formerly of the Trailblazers. I don't follow basketball enough to know if he's still on the Trailblazers or not, but he gave him a shout out over Twitter. And the 23-year-old New York Puerto Rican is certainly making some waves, and wish him the best of luck at 168. He might be making ambitious moves in the division. It's quite a loaded division. I mean, you got guys like Canelo and David Benavidez. Certainly could be an interesting addition to the mix. Speaking of interesting stories, we have Oscar Valdez making his first appearance at 130, and his victory sets him up for a fight against Miguel Berchelt next up, fellow Mexican countryman who has the WBC 130-pound title. And, I want to say off the bat that many people are knocking Oscar Valdez's performance. But honestly, I think I'm in possibly the rare camp that consider it a bit of an underrated performance for Valdez, all things considered. He hasn't fought since November. People are knocking him for the flat showing in the early rounds, allowing Velez to take the fight to him and getting some good shots in. But at the same time, Velez has never been knocked out before. This is the first time Velez has been knocked out. He's been 10 competitive rounds with Ryan Garcia not long ago. He's fought Evgeny Gradovich to a draw for a title. I mean, this is a pretty well-established guy at 130, Velez. And, as a established veteran, he's expected to give even a good fighter and an accomplished fighter like Valdez some difficulty, which he did, and Valdez figured him out, put him down 3 times, and became the first to stop him. I mean, I'd say that's a hell of a 130-pound debut. Whether or not he can be victorious against Burchell's another story, but Michael, I know that you were particularly impressed by him back when he pulled out his broken jaw victory in 2018 against Scott Quigg. Is there anything you'd like to add about Valdez moving forward?
Well, I'm sympathetic to your point of view, Alden, and I mean, he's a very likable fighter, a likable guy. I do feel that, he did seem to take more punishment than I think most of us would like to see him take, but at the same time, you have to have some regard for his opponent, quality opponent. The question is he going to be, hopefully, maybe a little sharper, a little more responsible, defensively speaking, moving forward? Because Burchelt is a dangerous guy, we would all agree. Yeah. That's a fantastic matchup, though, and sign me up for that one. I can't wait to see it.
Yep, Burchelt's on the short list of quality fighters who have fought on ESPN's top-ranked series since COVID has struck. He kind of fought a nobody in comparison with Velez, but I think that's a very good fight. Hopefully it gets made before the year's over. I think a lot of fireworks we can see. Burchelt's really an offensive machine, whereas Valdez, under the tutelage of Eddie Reynoso, who he's been training with for the last 4 fights since the Quigg fight, he's kind of been diversifying it. He's changing his style from more of a go-forward type to more of a boxer-puncher that exhibits some good defensive prowess, although some would argue the other way after his performance. I think he has plenty of upside with Eddie Reynoso, and we'll see how that materializes in the future. So, speaking of the future, we finally are getting away from the sole source ESPN top rank boxing market, and we have some good upcoming action on DAZN and PBC. Speaking of DAZN, Friday night we had the return of Virgil Ortiz Jr. as he improved to 16-0, all by knockout, with an impressive 7th-round stoppage over veteran Samuel Vargas. Another tremendous showing by the 22-year-old welterweight, who seems to be on the short track in a normal world to a title shot in a division largely monopolized by PBC fighters. He's called out Keith Thurman, Danny Garcia, and Sean Porter after his victory, but it still remains to be seen what kind of deal Golden Boy Promotions can work out with Heyman in this COVID climate. Certainly want to see him step up in class to face the best in the world as soon as possible, but as I stated before, it might be more of a political matter than a matter of skill. Also, coming up, one of my favorite prospects, Stephen Fulton, he will be fighting for the WBO vacant 122-pound title on August 1st. And if you haven't seen much of him in the past, I highly recommend you checking him out on YouTube and watching him on August 1st. He's a very technically sound, not a huge puncher, but from Philadelphia, and has some pretty good victories under his belt. You got David Benavidez defending his WBC 168-pound title on August 15th on Showtime. A week later, we have Aliter Alvarez going up against Joe Smith Jr. in what is perhaps one of the most interesting potential barn burners of this year so far, Michael.
Yeah, I agree. Joe Smith Jr. versus Aliter Alvarez. That's a crossroads fight in a stacked light heavyweight division. How long have we been talking about all the talent at 175 pounds?
The talent that doesn't
unfortunately,
fight each other.
well, yeah, it hasn't been realized. It's a bit frustrating. Of course, that's part of being a boxing fan.
Besides
Especially,
Beterbiev and Vosdick, I mean, give credit where credit's due.
yes, absolutely. No, there have been some good fights. Alvarez versus Kovalev, I mean, for that matter, and they fought twice. I mean, there have been some good matchups. It's not as if none of the potential that we see at 175 pounds has been realized. But yeah, I mean, it's a stacked division, and this is one of the best matchups. It's been talked about off and on, actually, for, well, over a year. And it's a crossroads fight. I mean, the guy who loses this match is going to have to go back to the drawing board, and the winner will be in line for something big. And I have to lean towards Storm Alvarez. I think he's a little sharper. He's a little more skilled. But you can't count out Joe Smith Jr., who, you know, a few years ago was our fighter of the year after he knocked out, refresh my memory, Fanfara.
First round.
And Hopkins. He knocked out Hopkins.
Yeah, knocked him out of the ring. Knocked his career out of the spotlight.
So I mean, both these guys are coming off wins, and are looking to, you know, get themselves right back in the title picture at the top of the division. Though both will be motivated, you know it. It should be a fantastic fight. I can't wait to see it.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think the most fascinating thing about this fight is that they both punch like a mule and they both take a really, really good shot. So it'd be interesting to see who breaks, because they're both offensive fighters, and you know, we've had some issues with Alvarez in terms of his consistency and how spirited his performances are, but I think Joe Smith Jr. might be just the style to bring it out of him. So really fascinating fight. Be happening a month from now in the bubble, they call it, and it's a little small room in the MGM Grand that I'm sure everyone's aware of by now, and ESPN. Good for social distancing, and hopefully we don't see very much social distancing between the two fighters when the bell rings, though. Week after that, Jose Ramirez finally takes on Victor Postol in a fight that kind of lost its luster, if it had any. I think it's a pretty good fight, but it's really kind of a foregone conclusion before Jose Ramirez finally takes on Josh Taylor, who is signed this year with Top Rank, and probably one of my favorite fights at 140 in many years. Really, really good fight I'm looking forward to when it happens, if and when it happens, at 140 to unify the titles. But now we'll shift gears to the first pay-per-view boxing cards since the COVID crisis. And I know that it's arguable that in a normal time, well, honestly, I might have to disagree with you. I think these are two pay-per-view worthy cards, Michael. I know that you might have a different opinion, but Jermall Charlo fighting Sergey Derevyanchenko is a terrific fight. I know we can agree on that. And Jermell Charlo is taking on Jason Rosario, who's coming off a big upset earlier this year against Julian J. Rock Williams. So I think in September, a 6-fight pay-per-view card in the Mohegan Sun, I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, I guess I'm old school because, in my opinion, a pay-per-view event should be one that, you know, is a crossover event that actually has the power to get the attention of non-boxing fans, sports fans, mainstream fans. And I'm not sure that any of these matches announced today by Showtime reach that level. But the Mechanic versus Hitman Charlo, I believe I've got the nicknames right. I mean, that's a fantastic fight. That's a fantastic middleweight fight. It's one of the best matches you can make in the 160-pound division.
I am so happy that Derevyanchenko is still being considered for big fights. I just wanted to go out there and say that.
Well, yes, I know that you feel that he deserved better against Golovkin. For me, well, okay. I mean, I don't have strong opinions. I mean, those were close fights. Those were close fights, in my opinion. And these days, a 12-round fight, a close fight, it can be a draw. It can go to either guy by 1 or 2 points. I felt Golovkin kind of pulled out the fight in the last round, but it was very close. Definitely agree. The bottom line is these are two of the best fighters in the 160-pound division. They're both tough, strong guys. They both can punch. It's a great matchup. It's a quality fight. And if anything is pay-per-view worthy that's been announced today, that, I guess, would be it. Because that's a tough fight to pick. I mean, I don't know if either one of us want to go out on a limb quite yet, but
I'll start.
Go for it.
I favor Derevyanchenko in this fight. I think he's shown a lot more depth. He's fought much better opposition than Jermall Charlo. I mean, he's fought the two best middleweights of this generation, Danny Jacobs and Gennady Golovkin, and he was outgunned in terms of power by both of them. Yet you could make a case that he won both of those fights. Both were very close fights. But to this date, actually, he's the only fighter I can recall ever hurting Triple G. He hurt him to the body. I believe it was the end of the 4th round. He put on a terrific fight, really gutsy performance against both men. Yeah, it was the kind of performance against Danny Jacobs that when I watched it, and this was actually the first fight I covered for the Fight City, it was one of those tough fights that was just, okay, who's going to fight Derevyanchenko again? I mean, he came up slightly short. Why would any top-notch fighter risk it all against him again? And credit to Triple G, he did that at a very vulnerable time for Triple G, coming off a couple fights away from his first defeat against Canelo Alvarez. He risked it, almost lost, but came out on front. And now credit to Jermall Charlo, who's been criticized for cherry-picking opposition. He's risking it all against Derevyanchenko in a fight that, I don't think he's going to win. I think his power might bail him out. I mean, Derevyanchenko has been hurt by both Triple G and Jacobs, and Jermall Charlo is certainly a big puncher in his own right. But he's not anywhere near as overall developed and polished as Triple G and Danny Jacobs. So I think Derevyanchenko will be more successful in kind of neutralizing his power and outboxing/outworking Jermall Charlo, who has shown some serious vulnerability against the likes of Matt Korobov recently, and who is really the best middleweight he's ever fought. So I'm going to go on a limb and say Derevyanchenko, but I agree with you 100%. Terrific fight.
Well, I'm going to hold off on making a pick, Holden, but you make a very convincing case here. I mean, the thing is, it seems to me, and I could be wrong, of course, but it seems to me that at some point, Charlo's, I would argue that he might have a slight edge overall in speed and quickness, and he's going to land some clean shots. And when he does, I mean, who knows, right? I mean, that's the key thing. I mean, he's got wicked power, and
very talented fighter.
Exactly talented fighter. This is a guy with great athletic talent, and that's what makes it an interesting matchup and worth seeing. And both guys are in their primes, and again, it's two of the best middleweights on the planet. So
that's kind of a crossroads fight too.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
There's a lot to lose.
The stakes are high. The stakes are high with this fight, especially when guys are only fighting once or twice a year, and it's a fairly competitive middleweight division. Golovkin is still in the mix. There's a lot at stake, and it's the most intriguing matchup that's been announced.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's going to be a very competitive fight. I'm looking forward to it very much. But speaking of very big fights that have been announced, I'm not sure if we all agree it's intriguing. I know that me and you disagree, but speaking of very big fights that have been announced, we had Tank Davis versus Leo Santa Cruz slated for Showtime pay-per-view October 24th in the Mohegan Sun. This will be for the 130-pound WBA super title, whatever that means, if you still remember, that Santa Cruz won after Davis moved up to 135 pounds and relinquished the title. I guess it's kind of a cliche by now that the safest bet in this fight is that Tank doesn't make weight. I don't know how he was able to commit to 130 pounds. I don't know if someone did that for him. I mean, this is a guy that's came in comically overweight in the past for 130 pounds. But, after moving up to 135, he's going to move back down again for the money, for the biggest fight of his career, the best opposition he's ever faced. I just worry that he's going to come in way too big and he's going to win on the account of his size against Leo Santa Cruz, who is a former bantamweight champion. His one title is in 4 different weight divisions. What are your opinions of this fight?
Well, it's a bit disappointing in the sense that you've got two boxers here, both. I mean, no one can argue their talent, their potential, their pedigree, and yet they're both underachievers. So, neither one seems to have the focus and the desire to really maximize their natural abilities and what has gotten them this far. I mean, Leo Santa Cruz has fought, like 4 times in the last 3 years? I mean, it's disappointing. I mean, this is a guy who at one point, when he was battling Carl Frampton. I mean, this was a potential star of the sport, of the lower weight classes at least. And Gervonta Davis, I mean, the less said, the better. I mean, we all saw the video. It's distressing. I mean, this is a guy who, if he's found guilty in a court and sent to jail, I mean, is anyone going to shed a tear? I'm certainly not going to shed a tear. I mean, and he's shown certain, he falls in line with somebody like Adrian Broner, right?
Yeah, I'd say we still need to see him at the top level to make that assessment because, Broner looked good too before he fought world level opposition.
Well, I was thinking more about the fact that he falls in line with Adrian Broner in terms of attitude.
Outside the ring, definitely.
Yeah, in terms of the lack of discipline and so on. And that he's – there's no question. I mean, at this point in time, there's no reason to think that he's going to actually make the most of his talent and his ability. So this is a matchup of two underachievers, and you just hope that one of the two, between now and the opening bell, gives their head a shake and turns things around. And that person would be the one who not only wins, but then is able to capitalize on the victory.
I certainly agree that Tank is an underachiever. I mean, his only notable victory to date is against Jose Pedraza, pretty long time ago, actually. I think early 2017. I think Leo Santa Cruz recently, due to the inactivity, has kind of struck a nerve as something of a wasted talent. I really don't understand how a fighter in those kind of weight divisions, I mean, he started at bantamweight, is being marketed as a commodity by Al Heyman. I think this is the kind of guy with the way he fights and, some of the entertainment value that he brings is someone that should be definitely fighting a lot more frequently. I mean, it's hard to market a guy in those weight divisions as a commodity unless, they have the talent of a Tank Davis or so. But needless to say, I mean, Santa Cruz has won titles in 4 different weight divisions. There was a time where that was a significant accomplishment, obviously before Adrian Broner. But, it is what it is. And I think his activity and his pedigree is possibly something that if Tank Davis isn't, comically bigger than him and it's something of a fair fight, I think that will really test Tank Davis to the limit potentially, because Santa Cruz takes a terrific shot. I'm not sure if he's ever faced anyone with remotely the kind of power as Tank Davis. I'm sure he hasn't. But if he can find a way to neutralize that, I think he's going to really show what Tank's mental toughness is really all about. I mean, we mentioned Adrian Broner, who displayed terrific talent before he was forced to show how mentally tough he was at that high level. This is that opportunity for Tank Davis, if the circumstances are right, to showcase whether or not he is mentally an elite fighter. Santa Cruz might be the perfect guy to bring that out of him. So I'm hoping for a good fight. Of course, many things can go wrong there, but we'll see. Showtime pay-per-view October 24th. Interesting fight. I'm sure people will get their money's worth, or I really hope they do. So last week we had an article from Ronnie McCluskey on the 90s, which kind of struck a nerve with me in a good way because I'm a 90s child. And the 90s, I think objectively, is one of the most dramatic decades in modern boxing history. Certainly one of the most dramatic in terms of the quantity of major upsets. I mean, we started the year with Tyson Douglas. We had Holyfield Tyson. We'll start here with Chavez Randall. Because Chavez, Julio Cesar Chavez, one of the best pound-for-pound fighters, probably considered the best pound-for-pound fighter before he was given a gift against Pernell Whitaker in 93. Chavez was on the warpath to being 100-0, which is a astonishing milestone if you were able to achieve it. And very few people thought Frankie the Surgeon Randall of Morristown, Tennessee, was going to really put a dent in that, which ultimately he did. He came in a 20-1 underdog. And it's almost sad that a guy that has won 48 of his 51 fights, has a victory over Edwin Rosario, granted over the hill, was treated with such little regard, Michael.
Well, yes, and it's kind of sad that the Frankie Randall, the Randall versus Chavez rivalry doesn't get really as much attention as it should. Before we go into that, I just want to quickly just say my thanks to Ronnie McCluskey, who has kind of spearheaded these posts we've done. We did one on the 80s, well, actually two. There was two posts, 80 fights from the 80s, and the whole idea is we're all stuck in the lockdown, quarantine, it's the COVID crisis, and if you need something to fill your time, well, we assembled all these great fights, 80 fights from the 1980s, and all you have to do is open up the link, open up the post, and all the links are there to the videos or articles with the videos embedded, and you can just spend hours watching all these great fights.
Yeah.
And so we did 80 fights from the 80s, and then we did 50 epic fights from the 90s. And again, thanks to Ronnie McCluskey for spearheading this, but other people involved with the FightCity.com have helped out with all the blurbs and the selections of the great fights. And my thanks to all of them, to everybody who's helped out. So, yes, to go back to Randall versus Chavez, what I always remember is that, I mean, when Frankie Randall defeated Julio Cesar Chavez, this was a major upset. This was a major happening. And yet somehow it didn't seem to register beyond hardcore boxing people. And it was a mark, in my opinion. I mean, the 90s, as much as it's a great decade in terms of there's some great fights, some great rivalries, some great events, it's also the decade which saw boxing kind of fade away a bit, step into the background a bit.
There were some major disappointments in the 90s, I'll give you that.
Yeah, it started to move towards being what it became in the 21st century, which is kind of a niche sport. I mean, in the 70s and 80s, it was firmly mainstream. And we can discuss, at length about why this happened in the 1990s. There's several different factors in my mind that contribute to this. But the fact that Frankie Randall's win over Julio Cesar Chavez didn't make, the front page of the sports section of your local paper, didn't make the cover of Sports Illustrated, kind of points in the direction of this, of what was happening in the larger picture of things.
Well, I think most people already considered Chavez's draw against Pernell Whitaker the previous year as the end of Julio Cesar Chavez as this warlord, 100-0 approaching guy. I mean, that was on the cover of major magazines. The robbery draw that Chavez was given as a gift against Pernell Whitaker. Frankie Randall, a year later, less than a year later, was almost a foregone conclusion that Chavez was over the hill, and his age and ring wear was really starting to catch up with him, which is exactly the kind of performance he put on. But the performance that Randall displayed was truly phenomenal. I mean, his knockdown in the 11th round, becoming the first man to knock down Julio Cesar Chavez, who later said he slipped. Customary of Chavez, who is not the best sportsman in the world. I think Randall put on a tremendous performance, very spirited effort.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why this is an ongoing debate at thefightcity.com and elsewhere. It's one of the reasons why on our list of the top 12 all-time greatest Mexican fighters, number one is not Julio Cesar Chavez, but instead Salvador Sanchez. And one of the reasons is that Chavez showed himself to not be a great sportsman. He could never, ever admit that somebody got the better of him on a particular night. And of course, he quit on more than one occasion.
Yeah.
So I mean, and the second fight against Frankie Randall, which Chavez absurdly won. I mean, there was a bad cut opened up.
They took a point away, right?
Well,
for an accidental headbutt, they took a point away from Randall, which ended up being the difference.
Well, Chavez, it's an established fact. Chavez changed. Chavez was not quite the warrior that everyone had come to know as soon as he saw his own blood. And he went to the doctor, he was directed to be seen by the ringside physician. And the ringside, all his body language was negative. All his body language was, I don't want to be here. Yeah. And he had this bad cut. And I mean, the rivalry and the other key factor to keep in mind is that how long did it take for Chavez Randall 3 to happen? Was it 4 years? 5 years?
Yeah.
I mean, a ridiculous length of time. I mean, I have problems. I have a little bit of I have more than one problem with Chavez and his legacy as a great fighter. There's no question nobody can question what he achieved, his record. He's an all-time great. No question about that. But I'm not sure he's an all-time great competitor.
Well, I think he's just given so much of himself by that point. The Melvin Taylor fight in 1990, which is my personal favorite fight in history. His nature to never give up and keep fighting even though he was dreadfully behind on points. His confidence wore on right until the last 15 seconds, literally. So I think, honestly, you could probably make a case that the Melvin Taylor fight was the beginning of the end for both Chavez and Taylor.
Yes.
Chavez never had a great victory besides, his dominance showing against Hector Camacho. Make what you want of that. Besides that, I mean, that was the most notable victory Chavez had since the Melvin Taylor fight. It might have took out, every bit of energy from Chavez as well. And certainly when he needed it the most against Frankie Randall, it wasn't there. Because there was a moment in the mid-rounds against Frankie Randall where Chavez seemed to be kind of just giving up. It was subtle, but you could see it. I mean,
yeah,
he just could not keep up that level of competitiveness that Randall was just fighting with every inch of his will to put on him. And what I found pretty interesting was in the interview, kind of ironic, Chavez, who was robbed of a draw, not robbed, but he was he lost out on a potential draw against Frankie Randall because of a point deduction Richard Steele made in the 11th round for low blows, which you can argue its merit, but he cursed out Richard Steele. F you, Richard Steele, to Ferdy Pacheco after the fight, ironic in the fact that many believe, not including myself, but many believe that Richard Steele was the same referee that gave him the 1990 fight against Meldrick Taylor. So some irony surrounding Richard Steele's role in Chavez's legacy.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, a very dramatic fight between Chavez and Randall, and one of the best fights of the 90s to look at, as noted in Ronnie's article. So highly encourage everyone to check that out. Second fight we'll talk about is the famous Fan Man fight, Holyfield Bowe 2, November 6, 1993 in Caesars Palace. And I think it's unfortunate because the Fan Man incident really robs people of the acknowledgement that this is Holyfield's finest hour, effectively. And I think without the Fan Man, without that monumental lapse in focus that Holyfield was showing, I think Holyfield might have gotten Bowe out of there, because he was putting some serious punishment on Riddick Bowe, dominating the first half of the fight, hurting him several times, and it wasn't going well for Bowe in the sense that it looked like he was heading towards a stoppage defeat, which, if you put it in retrospect, if you consider a Holyfield knockout of Bowe in the rematch, I think Holyfield's legend just grows by that much more. Because if that were to happen, there might not have been a third fight between Holyfield and Bowe that arose because of really how close the second fight ended up being after the Fan Man incident. And the fact that the Fan Man, on paper, really took a lot more from Bowe than Holyfield, in the sense that Bowe's wife passed out, his pregnant wife passed out at ringside and had to be taken to a hospital, and Bowe elected to keep fighting. But make no mistake, I mean, Holyfield, in his first and only fight with Emmanuel Stewart, the late great trainer, he really put on a terrific display of boxing and fighting, really the full package against Bowe in the rematch.
Well, it's interesting. You've got me thinking back to that fight, Alden, and motivating me to go back and watch it closely, because I always felt that I mean, at the time, everyone was kind of enamored with the feel-good story that was Holyfield coming back. I mean, keep in mind that the first fight, while it was competitive, there was absolutely no question. Nope. Riddick Bowe, kicked Holyfield's butt. And also keep in mind that Holyfield always had to struggle against this kind of image of not being a legitimate heavyweight. He moved up from cruiserweight, and there was always kind of this feeling, this questioning of Evander Holyfield. Could he really compete with the best heavyweights? Is he really big enough? The first fight with Riddick Bowe, he gave away 30 pounds.
Yeah.
And that was reflected to a certain degree, in terms of the action in the ring. I mean, Riddick Bowe really had nothing to fear from Holyfield physically, in terms of Holyfield's strength and power. And so it was a great feel-good story that Holyfield could regroup and come back and defeat Bowe. But I always felt like it was kind of, brushed under the rug, so to speak, that it was actually a very, very close fight.
Oh, yeah.
And at the end, you could make a case, in my opinion, that actually Bowe deserved better. So you've got me thinking, maybe I got to go back and take another look at this fight, because yeah, there's no question that Evander Holyfield gave a gallant performance, as he often did, and there's no question that Emmanuel Stewart helped him, tactically speaking, in terms of how to deal with a man who was bigger and longer reach, height advantage, arguably stronger, more powerful, how to box him, how to defeat him. And that as you say, the whole Fan Man incident kind of overshadows things. It just adds to the general intrigue of that rivalry, which I think is perhaps an underrated rivalry in terms of Holyfield and Bowe gave us 3 great fights, and all 3 were highly competitive. And all three, in different ways, kind of, intriguing, idiosyncratic. I mean, the third fight is kind of strange. I remember watching it and wondering if there was something wrong medically, physically with Evander Holyfield.
And there was, but not what everyone thought it was.
Exactly. I mean, and yet, despite that, that's the fight where Evander Holyfield, lands a huge left hook and almost knocks out Riddick Bowe. So, yeah. I mean, all three fights are intriguing and in different ways. And but again, you've got me thinking back to that second fight and wondering if I need to go back and reevaluate it because, again, I think it was very close. And I don't disagree with you. I think Evander Holyfield gave us a tremendous performance. But I'm not sure that Riddick Bowe doesn't have a case to maybe.
Yeah, he does.
Okay.
All right. Absolutely. He's so the fight was extremely close. It could have easily been called a draw. And really,
all right. We're on the same page then.
The fight was extremely close. Could have been called a draw. The difference could have been the 7th round that the Fan Man flew into the ring on because basically, how do you score that round? I mean, you got a potential terrorist threat, and in the moment for a judge, putting yourself in a judge's position. This was around the time of the Gulf War and Kuwait, and way before my time, obviously. I was an infant child at the time, and people didn't know what the hell was going on. And you had this monumental delay in the action, and then you have to score the round as a whole. When really, after the fight, everyone's a little shaken up, and that ended up being one of the rounds that decided this very close majority decision victory for Evander Holyfield. That being said, and for one reason or another, I have no idea how. Another very ironic fact about this fight is that Bowe really stepped it up after the Fan Man, in which he had every reason not to because of the state of his wife passing out while pregnant at ringside and taken to a hospital. Instead of being with her, which no one would have blamed him for him doing so, he chose to fight on. And, tactically, I thought using his jab much better than he did in the first half of the fight and controlling Holyfield for long patches. But before that, I think Holyfield it looked to me like he was starting to really control the fight and get closer and closer towards a knockout of Riddick Bowe, who he hurt several times and was really dominating in the first half of the fight. So really interesting fight, a lot of interesting momentum swings, but we're in agreement that it was probably Holyfield's finest hour, regardless of whether or not he won the fight or not.
Well, when you talk about Holyfield's finest hour, I mean, my goodness, it's a career full of great highlights.
Yeah, you could say the Tyson fight.
Yeah. I mean,
I just don't think he's ever looked better technically than he did against Riddick Bowe in the second fight.
Yeah, you may be correct. You may be right. I mean, it was, not to repeat myself, but it was a very close fight, very intriguing matchup. And you got me, to your credit, Alden, you've got me rethinking and reconsidering it. And of course, we should probably, take a second here and just mention the whole Fan Man thing. I mean, for those not familiar with what we're talking about, a paraglider in the middle of a heavyweight championship fight descended out of the air and flew right into the open air stadium at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas and almost succeeded in landing right in the ring. Instead, he landed on the ropes of one side of the ring and then collapsed into the ringside seats nearby and was immediately attacked by people who were probably fearing that he was attempting some kind of attack himself, and rendered unconscious. The whole thing was bizarre, and we still there's still been never. I mean, the man who did it, his name at this moment escapes.
James Wilson, maybe.
I don't know, but he's since died. He's no longer with us. But, I mean, he never gave any kind of satisfying explanation as to why this occurred and whether he actually intended to land in the ring during the fight. The whole incident is just bizarre and inexplicable and remains so, and somehow is emblematic of the sport of boxing, I think, in some bizarre way. I mean, only in boxing, as Rock Newman at the time said, how does this stuff find us?
Yeah. Great quote. I mean, in general, Bo's career is just a massive, just a very dubious career full of very interesting surprises, and I think a lot of that could be chalked up to just Rock Newman and his character in and of itself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Mental note, future podcast episode, Alden. Bo versus Galata, both fights.
Oh, yeah. Yep, its own legendary night on the HBO series. I think I want to end the Bo Holyfield 2 discussion with a pretty entertaining quote from the fan man, James Miller, stated after the fight. It was a heavyweight fight, and I was the only guy that got knocked out.
There you go.
A severe beating by the people in attendance. And I think some of that was due to the anxiety of Jesse Jackson being ringside for that fighter, closely in attendance, and some believing that it might have been an attempt on Jesse Jackson's life above all. So
I didn't know about that. Thank you, Alden.
Yeah, it's encourage everyone, if you haven't seen it, to watch the HBO Legendary Night on Bo Holyfield as well. There's a lot of discussion about the Fan Man incident. A lot of good interviews, including one with Jesse Jackson as well. So, all in all, great article by Ronnie McCluskey. Great look back at the 90s. Very pleased to look back at the 90s with yourself, Michael, as we conclude episode 42 of the Fight City podcast. I encourage everyone to check out thefightcity.com for daily updates and everything more.
Protect yourself at all times. Any questions from the challenger?